Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this Officers Association webinar on portfolio careers. And thank you for spending the time to come and listen to us on such a lovely evening. My name is Fiona Jackson, and I will be hosting the webinar, and I'll introduce myself in a minute. And my guest speaker for tonight is Vix Anderton. Okay, so just to say a little bit about myself then, some of you will have probably met me before, but I'm one of the career consultants at the Officers Association. I did do a short service commission in the regular army quite a long time ago, and I've had various roles since then, working in the commercial world with John Lewis, a small company in the city called Exclusive Analysis, and more recently in the third sector. But the important person tonight is Vix, so I'm just going to go on to the next slide. And Vix, can I ask you just to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, of course. So good evening, everybody. As Fiona said, my name is Vix Anderton. I currently describe myself as having a portfolio career or as a multi-potentialite. So that really means someone with a diverse set of interests across different domains who builds a career in different areas, different employment contracts, temporary positions, things like that. It's also known recently as like slash careers, which I'm not such a fan of, so that'd be like lawyer slash blogger, for example. So my portfolio career is now sort of just over a year old and works across three main domains. So I do a lot of work around mental health, well-being and resilience as a life coach and yoga teacher, and I have my own business in that space. I also work as a inclusive leadership and gender consultant, so supporting organisations with diversity and inclusion. And then I also work as a gender and conflict advisor, so for the stabilisation unit and for some different international development organisations, helping them think about women, peace and security in conflict-affected countries. That's me now. I started my career in the Royal Air Force. I was an intelligence officer straight after my first degree. I did that for just shy of 10 years before leaving in 2014 and spending sort of those 3 years in the middle working in the international development sector on kind of program and operations management.
Vix, that's great because it's been interesting. I've known you for quite some time now, and interesting to see how your career has developed. So I look forward to hearing more about your portfolio career as we go through the webinar. Okay, so if I can just ask you, Vix, to sort of talk about what you're going to cover tonight, and then we'll start going through the presentation.
Sure. So what we're going to talk about this evening is really kind of different aspects of a portfolio career. So some tips from my own experience of how to make that successful. Then going to have a little think about how you know whether a portfolio career is the right thing for you, because I really don't think it's the right thing for everybody at every stage of life. And I think it's important to explore some of the pros and cons of this way of working. And then finally, we're going to look a little bit at managing your mental health when it comes to a portfolio career, because there are some very particular stresses that you face with this kind of way of working that I think take quite a lot of active management to make it successful.
Thanks for that, Vix. So anyway, Vix, just can you start off then by talking about how you went about building your portfolio career?
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't just launch myself into a portfolio career, so I really make that clear. So I've been working in the development sector for 3 years in a few different roles. And when I decided to move on from that, it became very clear to me that I had this very diverse range of interests and skills, and that I wasn't going to find what I wanted in just one job. So I started to explore this idea of a portfolio career, which really for me meant more than just doing consultancy work in one area. You know, it's very clear that I wanted to work across these quite different areas and explore different interests. So I had a little bit of a run-in to that. I had a 3-month notice period in my job, and had actually been sort of planning it for a couple of months before I even handed in my resignation. So I think that is quite an important thing to do. Really, this sort of talks to my second point here, is it really takes time to make this successful. Like getting a job out of the military generally, I think it takes sort of time to find the right connections, to find the right things for you, to find your niche. I think it's really taken me really the whole of this last year to kind of get this career to the point where I have sustained contracts, ongoing regular work with different organisations. I continually network and look for different opportunities coming up, which sort of talks to my third point there, is like the importance of networking. And I think this goes beyond just a portfolio career. I've very much found this in all of the work that I've had since leaving the Air Force. But it's really all about who you know, making those personal relationships.
Sorry, Vix, can I just sort of interject there for a minute? I see a lot of clients who say, they just don't like networking, it's false and it's shallow, and they don't want to do it. Have you got any hints or tips for the people who are listening and our clients about, how you can be successful at networking?
Yeah, I actually I answered some questions this for Pathfinder magazine maybe a couple of months ago. And no, actually, I don't. I don't really like the word networking. I've used it here just really for the slides. I actually much prefer to think about how you make meaningful relations and connections with people. And I think if you approach it with that way, like I just want to go out and meet people and talk to them about what they do and find out more about them. Essentially, find out ways that I can help them. I found that's built, genuine relationships with people. And it feels much more authentic than going into it thinking, oh, I've got to network and I've got to leave here with X many business cards. And so I think approaching everything you do, everywhere you go, is a potential networking opportunity. So if I give you an example, one of the diversity and inclusion consultancies I work for now, I was introduced to through an ex-military officer on LinkedIn who I didn't actually know. But I'd written an article for Chatham House about gender mainstreaming in the military, and he had shared that with the MD of this consultancy firm that I now do quite a lot of work for. But when I first met her, it was really just, let's have coffee and let's talk, and we've obviously got some mutual interests. And that's how I approached that conversation. I was just keen to get to know her, and as we built that relationship, the opportunity to work together kind of became apparent.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly found with the networking that I've done, sometimes it's serendipity. You just happen to be in the right place at the right time and get chatting to somebody about something else, and then you realise that you have got connections, and it comes from there. So it is, as you say, just about talking to people and building relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And you never know when these relationships are going to pay off. Another company I do work for now, I met their CEO literally as I was even I think just before I left the Air Force, so maybe like 2013, 2014. And I got a phone call from him at the beginning of the year saying, we really need a gender advisor. Are you available? So it's worth sowing those seeds and maintaining those kind of relationships for sure.
Okay, thanks for that.
Yeah, so let me come back to my first point there, which is really around defining success, which is one of the reasons I got into a portfolio career. I wasn't necessarily interested in job status or earning lots and lots of money. I appreciate that may not be the same for everybody, but I really wanted to build a life that I didn't need a holiday from. And one of the reasons I left full-time employment was off the back of a period of work-related stress. And I was like, I don't want to live like this. I want to enjoy my life, enjoy living in London, and all of the benefits that come with that. But I think it's really clear that having a portfolio career can be more challenging in that there isn't a defined career path for you anymore. So I think it's really important for people to think about why they're moving into this kind of way of working and what success looks like for them. And that might change over time. So, my income goals for my first year were really to make it through to the end of the year without having to raid my piggy bank. This year now things are a little bit more set up and sustainable, and clearly, I'm increasing those income goals without wanting to sacrifice the flexibility that I have, with the way that I work, and the fact that I enjoy not having to work full time. So I think, yeah, getting really clear on what success looks like for you is a really important to stay clear.
Vix, would you say then it would be quite useful, to when you embark on a portfolio career, that you have to have maybe like some sort of cushion, financial cushion to start off with, because in your first year you may not be, earning possibly what you want to be earning or your target for that career?
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. I definitely had a 3-month buffer before I would need to go back to work, if I couldn't make it work, and could make the portfolio career work. I think it's possible to do it without it, and I think it really, one of the glorious things about a portfolio career is it looks different for everybody. So you would get to shape how it looks for you. I definitely appreciated having that buffer and being able to be patient and to let it come. That I never had to be totally panicked about when the next piece of work was coming in. So for me, having that buffer was really important. I think particularly people, I'm quite lucky, I don't have a family to support, but I do have a mortgage to pay. So understanding like my financial responsibilities, and this is something we'll touch on again a little bit later. But yeah, having that cushion can be really helpful.
I also like what you say about define success on your own terms, because I mean, something that's always struck with me was quite a long time ago, I read about, run your own race, that if you start comparing yourself with other people, you'll always be unhappy, because there'll always be somebody who's earning more than you, who's got possibly a better job than you think you've got. But actually, if you define your success, as I say, on your own terms, and you know what it is you want, then that's the most important thing.
Yeah, and I think that can be quite hard for service leavers, because throughout our careers we define success in terms of promotion and rank, and this is a really different way of living, but it's also quite liberating, because nobody else's portfolio career will look like yours. You don't have a whole team of colleagues who, am I earning more than them? Am I not? Am I achieving my goals, or am I not, compared to other people? So I think it can be really liberating. But when you're making decisions about what kind of work you take on, how much you're working, how much you want to earn, I think being really clear about what are the things that are important to you. So I made quite a conscious decision that I didn't want to work full time. Whether that was over the course of a month or over the course of a year. So I essentially took all of August off last year, and that was amazing. But that obviously means that I've not been earning as much as I would be if I was working full time.
Yeah,
and that's something that I've made very consciously based on the kind of lifestyle that I want to have.
And what about your last point about being clear about your expectations, availability, and wants? How does
Yeah,
that?
I think it's really important to communicate this to potential clients that you're working with. Something that I didn't necessarily do when I first started. So trying to find like the right kind of work that fitted in with what I wanted was, they weren't necessarily offering me the kind of thing that I wanted. And as soon as I got really clear to them and said, right, I'm prepared to take work, prepared to work full time up to 3 weeks, or I can work part time over 6 months, and I'm happy to travel, and all of those kind of things. It made it much easier for my clients to offer me pieces of work that I was actually going to be able to say yes to. I think also, again, keeping potential clients up to date with what your availability is. So if you know that you've got, the kind of work is drying up in a couple of months, reaching out to your network, letting them know what you're planning, letting them know when you're not available. If you've got a big project on, kind of really helps foster a very positive working relationship. You want to be a consultant, you want to be an associate who's easy to manage. So they know when they reach out to you that you're likely to be available, that you're likely to be able to say yes to the work that they're offering you. So I think that's really important. So whether that's being clear with potential clients, being clear with yourself about the kind of work that you want, how much do you want to be working in a team, working from home, on client site, all of these different things.
I'll just bring in a question there. There are some others which you might answer at the end, but there's somebody who's asked a question for consultancy, and you've touched on that just now. I'm particularly interested to know who you target and in what sectors.
Oh yeah. So initially it was really like who I was connected to, and the kind of work that I had done in the international development sector, and sort of leveraging off that initially. As I've built those relationships and starting to build a track record, I'm now starting to reach out to other similar organisations. So if I talk about like the D&I work, for example, I've been working with one company right from the start. Now I've got a bit of a track record there. I'm starting to literally like hit LinkedIn and hit Google and look at other D&I consultancies and just reach out. Really, in the same way I talked about networking, like reaching out just to kind of strike up a relationship in the initial instance. What kind of work do they do? What kind of clients do they work with? Interested to find out more, and then sort of talking through and often that's leading to working together.
Okay, so is it right for me? That's quite an important point.
Yeah, because I think this is a phenomenal way of working. I've really enjoyed it. I think probably more than I've enjoyed any way of working so far. But it's definitely not right for everybody, or it won't necessarily suit everybody at every stage of life. I'll talk about some of the pros and cons in just a second. But I think being really honest with yourself about what you want, how you want to live, how much security and stability you want, what are the things that are important to you. Because everybody will have an opinion. I remember when I first decided to do this, my father was skeptical, I think is probably a good way of putting it. Worried about how I was going to pay my mortgage. So everybody around you will have an opinion. I think it's really important to be really honest with yourself. Though saying that, I think ultimately the only way that you know that this is right for you is to give it a go, and to see how it works out. But doing that in a way where you kind of approach that with some curiosity. So if it doesn't work out, that's another reflection on you and how good you are at what you do, or any of that. Some of it is very much just timing, and we were talking earlier about sort of that serendipity of networking sometimes.
So sorry, I was just going to say, for somebody coming out of the armed forces, that in generally people will have a fairly organised and fairly sort of rigid framework to work around, and then suddenly you're going into this very sort of open framework where you're masterminding it all, really.
Yeah, and I would say that I don't think I could have done this straight after leaving the military.
Right.
For me, having 2 or 3 years of working in one sector, getting a lot of experience on my CV, meeting a lot of people, understanding this sector, particularly the development sector, was really important. I don't think I could have done this straight out of the RAF. And again, that will be different for different people. I know plenty of senior officers, for example, who've got a lot of very good connections in the defence industries, as an example. Find this much easier to go and do later on if you're already drawing a pension, for example. That might give you a degree of financial freedom that allows you to do this more.
Yeah.
But I think there are ways of exploring it. I sort of went like all in, but I know other people who will sort of take their hours down to part-time, so maybe 3 or 4 days a week, and then they're working on a side hustle alongside that, and then perhaps over time, the side hustle takes off, or they cut back on their hours, or move to a freelance contract with their employer. It doesn't have to be this kind of like all or nothing approach that I've sort of taken.
And you said you sort of mentioned the pros and cons. Would you like to sort of elaborate a bit more on that for our listeners?
Yeah, of course. So for me, the real benefits of doing this have really been around variety and flexibility. Like I said, when I was thinking about this, I recognised that I was never going to find a job that was going to let me work across security, project management, gender, conflict, quality and diversity, mental health, well-being. So being able to work across all those different interest areas and all those different skill sets, I find incredibly fulfilling. I really like the flexibility and the freedoms. Like I said, I took last August off. You know, I work delivering training 3 days last week, doing trial on Thursday. So I just sort of took Thursday off and worked a day over the weekend instead. And so being able to do that, really suits me at this stage of life. I know for parents, this can be again a really great way of working, because you can work your hours around your workload around when the kids are home, and being able to go and pick the kids up from school and things like that. But the downside is it is incredibly unpredictable. I'm now at the stage where I've got a couple of regular contracts, so I've got some days that come in like some regularity every month, but it's taken quite a while to do that. So it's quite it can feel quite unstable sometimes.
Yourself going through that, how in terms of being positive about it and thinking you're not quite sure about the future, where's it going?
Yeah, so this is where I really sort of draw on my planning skills. So I sort of do my financial forecasts 3 months out.
Right.
So I'm always thinking about, so what are we, May? So I'm already thinking about kind of like what kind of work have I got booked in July and August? Do I need something more? If the answer is yes, then like what can I start to do to generate work? Which normally is just as simple as kind of reaching out to my contacts, the clients that I've worked with before, and just letting them know that I'm available. Or like I said, I've been kind of trying to generate some new clients recently. So having that pipeline, and at least for me so far, it does just seem to kind of work itself out. You sort of do what you can, and you kind of have to trust that that things will pay off. The only sort of caveat on that is I've really found that it always takes a little bit longer than you think it's going to. So a client will come back and say, "Oh yeah, we've got this great piece of work. We really want you to do it." And it always takes like a month longer than you think it's going to get all the contracts signed and to actually start. And as particularly I work as an associate a lot, which means the organisation that I'm working with then has a client, and that can often get like a little bit protracted and drawn out. So yeah, planning is your friend when it comes to
You talked about actually contracts, Vix. I just wondered then, did you get sort of legal advice as to how you set up contracts and sort of payment terms from clients, or how did that work?
No, so I'm lucky because I like I say, most of the work I do is an associate. So the organisations I work for already have their standard contracts and things set up. So I just go with them. There are some great resources online. There's the IPSE,
Right.
which is an organisation to support people who are self-employed, and they provide legal advice and things like that if that's something that people need. It's not something that I've particularly had to worry about. And again, like all the organisations that I work for, I'm really lucky. They're very used to using consultants. They're really good about things like payment terms and paying within 30 days. I know that is not always the case, and I think it's really important to stress that the portfolio career freelancing really it can look very different depending on the organisations that you're working for and the sectors that you work in. So it's really worth doing your homework if you can. Speak to people that are freelancing or doing consultancy work in the area that you want to, and talk to them about the sort of like the logistical challenges that they face.
Yeah, that's good advice, because I think sometimes people who are self-employed, the problem is if they don't get paid on time, then that you can do all the financial planning in the world, but if you don't get paid on time, that could be a problem.
Yeah, it can be, and so it's kind of factoring in like a little bit of lag time, between contracting and when you're going to be paid. So I always ask organisations, when I submit my invoice, is my 30 days from then? Like some organisations you know, they have like a payment day once a month, and you either get in on time for that, or you're waiting until the next month. So making sure again that you kind of factor that in, and that you're not in that position where you're like, oh, this invoice hasn't come in and I'm about to default on my mortgage.
What about the loneliness? Because I would have thought one thing that certainly people in the forces have, and I know that myself because I was in the forces, that you are part of a team. Often you're leading a team. How did you cope with that side of things?
It can be really challenging. So I end up working from home a lot, which sometimes I really enjoy, but it can be lonely, and it's not so much about the lack of contact. It's more the fact that you're the only person who is responsible for all of this. There's nobody to kind of like bounce ideas off. You're the buck stops with you. If you don't get out of bed in the morning and don't do any work, then you're not going to get paid. Which is, it feels like a lot of responsibility at times. Yeah, so we'll take these in reverse orders. We're talking about loneliness. So, finding your tribe, finding a group of like-minded people to support you through this. So, I met a lot of people through like Facebook groups. Meetup is another really great place to meet other solo entrepreneurs, other people who are self-employed. I often, if I'm not working from home, I'll arrange to meet friends who work in a similar way. We'll sort of co-work together for the day at various places. Co-working spaces, picking the right one can give you this kind of support. Also thinking about the types of work that you're doing. So some of the training work that I do that with the same team every month, and that's really nice. Doesn't give me that team all of the time, but I have this sort of like little injection once a month of working with the same people, and that feels really supportive. So yeah, I think it's something to be very mindful of and be quite proactive about. It can be really easy to suddenly find yourself 3 days into the week and you realise that you've not really left the house, you've not really spoken to anybody for a few days, and suddenly you kind of feel a bit, you can suddenly feel quite low. So I think it's really important to schedule in, whether it's time working with other people or social time, to kind of stay connected.
What you seem to be saying, it is about managing yourself very much.
Yeah, exactly. And this is really what this whole slide about sort of mental health is you do have to be really proactive. I actually talked to some of my coaching clients about parenting yourself. You wouldn't let a toddler go all day without having had enough to drink, and having had enough to eat, and have like moved around and had playtime and had social time, and having a proper bedtime, and all of those kind of things. And yeah, I think as adults, we sort of forget that we're essentially grown-up toddlers that got better at managing our tantrums. So I think approaching it with that kind of, how do you manage yourself? How do you parent yourself during this? I think is really important, because I mean the basics are really obvious, but I think there's something about freelance work, because you don't have that sort of that structure, that framework that you have in a regular 9-to-5 job. It doesn't matter what time you get up. You don't have to be at a desk at a particular time, and you can work on into the evening, which is really tempting to if you're working on things that you really care about. So kind of building that discipline back in. And I think actually for service leavers, this is probably easier than for some of the other clients that I work with now, because we're used to this. Like, we're used to having routine and a sense of discipline and things. So I think it's sort of trying to maintain that.
Service people, though, they're good at making sure their team have all of that. Not necessarily maybe good at making sure they have that themselves.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah. Yeah, so you really do have to sort of almost divorce yourself from yourself occasionally, and go like, would I, if I was working for me right now, would I think this is okay?
Yeah.
Would I let myself do this?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, then it's time to sort of practice a little bit of personal leadership, and get yourself in order.
Shall I go on to the next slide?
Yeah, we're just kind of wrapping up now.
Okay, and there are a few questions. So if you want to summarise what we've done, and then I can just read out the few questions that we've got.
Yeah, so I guess the sort of the key takeaways to sum everything up is have a clear vision of the kind of portfolio that you want, the kind of lifestyle that you want, what is important to you, and define success for yourself. There are pros and cons of this way of working, like there are with all kinds of walks of life. So really take some time to understand what you're getting into. Talk to people who are working in a similar way in the fields that you're interested in. Really do your research and make sure you're prepared for what's coming. And then once you're into it, yeah, really have to make sure that you look after yourself, because at this point you are the only asset that your business, and you need to think of yourself as a business, and you're the only asset that you have. And if you don't look after that asset, then ultimately the business falls over. Because if you're not working because you're ill for a month, then that's clearly going to have a big impact on your earning potential and all the consequences of that.
That's brilliant. I'm just going to ask some of the questions now. So, Vix, a question that's come up here. As an associate, do you find the companies are pushing for a full-time commitment to overcome excess workload? So, how receptive are they when you say you can only wish to work for a few days a week or a month or whatever?
The organisations that I work with, basically their business model is built on associates. So they'll have a core team of full-time staff, and then their model is to use associates to deliver work. That's particularly in organisations that deliver training, where the volume of their work can be really unpredictable. So they don't want to have lots of people on full-time staff. But this is where it's important to get really clear on your expectations and to have that conversation. Because if they're actually after a full-time employee and that's not what you want, then it's much better to be clear and upfront about that from the start. And it might change. You might go from a position where in the early stages you have a lot of availability, but as different bits of work come in, your availability drops off, and that's fine. But I think the best thing to do is be really open and honest with your clients in the same way that you would want them to be with you. And I think that's the best way to sort of manage that relationship.
It's just about communicating with your clients, and they're sure of what you want and you're sure of what you can offer, sort of thing.
Absolutely. And I didn't really do this myself to start with, because I was so nervous about, well, what if they then don't want to work with me, and you kind of want to say yes to everything. And I think that's a really valid approach to start with, but I found that those working relationships have really improved, and I've been getting the kind of work that I actually want to have once I started being clear with people about what I wanted. It might mean that it takes a little bit longer for the right opportunity to come along for you, but it will then be the right opportunity.
Okay. And another question here is, can you be too young to run a portfolio career? So I'm just scrolling down. Young or inexperienced for a portfolio career, and would credibility be an issue?
I don't think you can be too young. I see a lot of people in their mid and late 20s who are doing this kind of work now, and I think for millennials, like I'm right at the upper age limit of millennials, and proper millennials, like this is very much more of a normal way of working. I do think you can be too inexperienced though. So go back to what I was saying earlier. I don't think I could have done this kind of work straight off the bat of leaving the Air Force. I definitely needed some time in a full-time job, really learning the ropes of civilian life and of the sector that I was working in. But I think that really depends on the sector that this person is working in. I've definitely built experience as I've gone along. I've never falsified anything, but I've definitely been working on the edge of my comfort zone a lot, taking on things that are perhaps like a little bit beyond my experience, and I've sort of grown into them. I think that's fine, but you need to have enough credibility, because you're working independently a lot. It's not like you're part of a team where you've got other people to support you and to help you learn. So you just need to be in control or in command of your expertise.
I think it's also a different way of working in this day and age, because my daughter's 25 and she's freelance and as a chef and a food stylist, and at that age people don't seem to mind it. You know, it's a different mindset in a way. But I suppose somebody leaving the forces or being in the forces is used to a very sort of dare I say, regimented career or a very structured career, and this is something completely different.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of younger people are doing it because they're perhaps struggling to get the kind of jobs that they want in full-time employment,
Hmm.
or those jobs don't exist, or they're hard to get, or they don't pay enough to support somebody just as a single venture. Yeah, I think for somebody leaving the service, I think it's just really a case of like whether you can get used to not having a regular paycheck, and to learn to live with that sort of that unpredictability, which is very different from what life is like in the forces.
And for some people, that might be easier if they have a pension coming. If they're leaving at a pension point, that might be easier because you have got a cushion of the pension.
Yeah, exactly. Or I know that it's been easier for people who have got a partner who is also working.
Yeah,
I think I think it really depends on your circumstances. For me as a single woman, looking like my mortgage payments aren't too high. That means all I have to worry about is me, and I can keep my living
yeah,
costs relatively low. But it really does depend on people's individual circumstances.
yeah. Just a couple more questions, Vix. This one came in quite early on, but hang on, just see. So does Vix have or consider it a necessity to have a vision or a mission statement and or a unifying website?
Not to start with.
Okay.
My answer to that. I think, when I was saying earlier, I think it's really important to have your own sort of internal vision. And for me, really, that was around like kind of the lifestyle I wanted, how I wanted to feel in my life. As the year has gone on, I'm now able to kind of to tell like a coherent narrative about the work that I do. So the golden thread for me is around changing the lives of women and girls, and I do that in three core overlapping areas. But really, I mean, I've only been able to articulate that, and I think it's like the last couple of months. I don't think it's something you need to have straight off the bat. Um, Again, having something like a website, something that I've done sort of later on, I think it can be important. But again, it depends on like how do you think your clients are going to find you. The coaching work that I do, I really drive a lot of people through the practical balance to the website, and that's very important in generating leads. The consultancy work that I do is all around relationships and networking. So having a website, I would never expect to get a consultancy client from my website, for example. So being clear about what it is that it's there for, where you think you're going to find your clients.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just looking through some of the other questions. There are a couple on sort of day rates and tax, but that might be better if I don't know if you prefer to answer those one-to-one with the person if they email you those.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I am not a financial advisor. And my general comment on day rates is it really depends on not only the sector that you're working in, but the type of work. So, for example, like when I work in the development sector, stuff that's contracted to DFID has a different sort of price range to stuff that's contracted
Yeah.
to this organisation.
And certainly, I think that is the case. If you're working in the highly commercial world, you can charge much higher day rates than say you're working in, say, for the third sector for charities. And there's quite an interesting question, maybe to finish up with, is what's been the most challenging aspect of your last 12 months establishing your portfolio career?
I think it's been sort of like holding my nerve with it. There have been times where I really sort of doubted myself and like whether this would work and whether I can make this successful, and kind of holding steady, trusting that it's going to be okay is challenging at times. But I have to say this has been so much more fulfilling than any of the other kind of work that I've done before. I'd actually say even more than my military career. So I don't. It hasn't felt challenging, even at the times where you do get a little bit nervous about whether I'm going to have to pay the mortgage next month, or whether I'm going to have to call the bank of mum and dad for an emergency bailout, which has not happened yet. I'm very pleased to say. But,
yeah. I mean, it does sound to me you've had to have a lot of courage, but also it's been very, very rewarding as well for you.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think like that's how I feel about my career since leaving the Air Force generally. That it felt like a big step to leave, but it's everything I've done since has continued to be more and more fulfilling. So yeah, I think for anybody listening who's thinking about it, then doing the planning, the research, and the preparation first makes it so much easier. You know what you're going into. You know that you know financial buffers and all of those kind of things. And then it's a case of kind of you do have to relinquish control a little bit. You do have to kind of like go with the flow and see what happens. It's definitely not a career choice for people who very much need to know exactly what's happening when and very much be in control, is my experience.
Okay, that's great. I'll leave it at that. And then the final slide is just if you want to have any further information, then please contact me at the Officers Association, or Vix has very kindly given her website address for you to look at as well.
Yeah, and I'm more than happy if people want to reach out to me with questions, or you feel like I can support you in some way, then either via Fiona or very happy people to approach me on LinkedIn as well.
Vix, thank you very much for your time. It's been really, really informative. So thank you. And no doubt we'll talk again in the near future. And thank you, everybody, for listening to us tonight. Good night.
Good night. Thank you very much.